gotten with their children and everything, grandchildren. It's just a no. They dropped out of church really then in the early to mid '80s. And yeah, there was, a lot of family clashes, even with her mom and dad, who were part of the church, the Martinez's and stuff. And I better make sure. But so is it off here though for now? Be sure you got a handout when you came in. They're at the doors. Okay, are we on, Bob? We're on. Okay. Let's open with the word of prayer. Our gracious Heavenly Father, once again, we're just mindful of the fact that you are the source of every good thing, and so we marvel when we think of all the good things that happened to us this past week. We thank you for life, for health, for strength, for family, for friends, for church family, for the Word of God. We thank you for yourself, that you are such a matchlessly wonderful God. And as we have the privilege today here in this country of freely and openly worshiping you, both as an individual as well as a corporate assembly. We pray for your help so that we would fall in love with your love letter, and we would desire to understand it and then put it into practice as we seek to honor you this week. We thank you specifically for the book of Proverbs. Thank you for all this wisdom that was put in such small sentences, and yet it is so profound. It is so pregnant with meaning, with application, with on-the-carpet living, and we ask for help as we try to come to grips with another segment today. So bless, we pray, in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, this is the KBC Adult Sunday School class, and as you know, for these 9 weeks, July and August, we are doing a study in the book of Proverbs. So naturally, we're not able to go verse by verse per se, and part of the reason for that is even just the nature of the way the book is laid out. But the first 2 weeks, we tried to lay a good foundation, and I'm going to repeat just a couple of things as we start today, not because in my old years I'm senile and forgot I said it, or not that I think you're so dumb you forgot it, but it is because this is so profound in understanding the entirety of the book. So remember, in those first 9 chapters, where it's written in a form where basically Solomon just keeps giving the same story over and over, and I think it's best summarized by this little diagram I've used, where he talks about the 2 ways. There are only 2 ways in life, okay? And so he talks about the illustrations, or you have this young man, and again, remember, it doesn't have to be a man, it's a young lady, and it's not just young, because as we see, this is true of all of us all the time. But you come to a fork in the road, and there are 2 ladies who are standing there, Lady Wisdom and Dame Folly. And both of them, if you will, are plying their wares. Dame Folly is saying, hey, young man, look at what I can offer. Follow me. It's not just a choice you're making for the moment, but this is a whole lifestyle. This is where you want to end up, even though she doesn't tell him the terribleness of where it ends up. But she, as you know, you have all those, shall we say, tempting sexual passages. And again, remember, it's more than just sex. It's a lot more. And writers debated, well, why did Solomon always use that? And we'll worry about that on a rainy day maybe, okay? Because we don't know. But the point is, as I've said, it's a reminder of just how the devil works to tempt people, all the methodology he uses. And that's exactly what we see in the New Testament when it talks about Satan. He uses all kinds of methods to sugarcoat things and make things look good up front without telling you this is how you can destroy your life. And then on the other hand, Lady Wisdom stands right there in the main intersection, the main stoplight, if you will, of the town. So she is also very available. And she says, young man, follow me. Remember what I offer. And she doesn't present it in a sexually charged way. She presents it as wisdom. That's why she's Lady Wisdom. And she says, if you will follow me, it will eventually end up in life. And remember, these 2 destinations, it's more than just, today sometimes when people travel, they say, I just need to get to my destination. And from here to there, who cares what I see or don't see? I just want to get there. Well, no, both of these are, with both of these paths, we see it's not just a destination we're heading to, but it is what happens on the way to the destination. Because we're talking about character. We're talking about what people are like. And as we said before, right here at the fork in the road, right here at the intersection, it doesn't look like it's a very big deal which choice you make. It's kind of like, well, look, that's not a very big angle there, so probably it really doesn't matter. Let me flip a coin, and it'll all be okay eventually. But as we know, as you keep going down these 2 ways, they are going to end up in drastically different things. And I use the illustration like on an interstate, where you come to just a fork in the road, and it's so easy a fork. And it says, I whatever this way, and I whatever that way. And little do you realize, if you follow those 2 forks, you're going to end up literally hundreds, if not 1,000 miles apart when those 2 interstates end. So it's a big deal, and that's what Solomon is trying to remind us in these early chapters. Then when we come to chapters, so we spent 2 weeks on that. Now, for the rest of the time, these 7 weeks, we have been talking about key themes in the book of Proverbs, because as you keep reading these one-liners in chapters 10 to 31, basically the one-liners are just referring back to this. and it's saying a righteous man does something, but a sinner does something else. And that's telling us that if you are saved, if you are a believer, that is the thing that ought to characterize you as you walk this way of righteousness. But for people who don't know the Lord, they are a sinner, and basically it's no wonder their character is so different. And remember what we've said. It doesn't mean that if you're saved, then what Proverbs talks about as a righteous man does this is always going to be true of you. Because we live in a nasty now and now. We live in a real world. We have the indwelling Holy Spirit to help us. We also have a sin nature that is constantly fighting, trying to get us to follow the wrong road. So sometimes even a righteous person will do things that are best known for sinners doing. And sometimes somebody who's on this road will actually do something, and you say, "You sure they're not saved? They seem so pleasant when I talk to them for 3 minutes today." Okay? But the point is, we're talking about character. We're talking about the consistent decisions that are being made. And I think today, in our key theme, we're going to see that more and more and realize how, as a believer, hopefully we are making more right choices than making wrong choices. And so at the top of your handout, as you see, I've listed once again, just for our reminder, these themes we're walking through. And we've already talked about being teachable, about our communication, about associations. Today we come to discernment. Lord willing, next week we'll talk about laziness, labor, hard work, diligence. Then we'll spend a week on that's abominable, because there are a lot of abominable sayings in the Bible. You heard it first here, that's right. Now remember, it's things that are abominable to God, because it sounds weird when you say there are abominable things in the Bible, right? And then finally, discipline, rod, reproof, correction, parents, children, parents, etc. So that's where we are headed. Now, today, our key theme is this theme of discernment. Discernment. And as we explore this theme, there are actually 21 examples in the book of Proverbs that we want to be looking at where we find this formula that says better than. Or as we would say it in English quite often, this is better than that. Okay? So that's why I'm using this moniker, this title of discernment. Because it is telling us as we are walking this path and we come here, we need to be discerning. Because even if we are believers, every day we in one sense come to forks in the road and we need to make choices. And we need to say, what is the best choice for me to make? Because they're not equal. Okay, one of them is going to be better than the other, and if I consistently choose things that are not good, it is going to have make a radical difference in my life. That's why I need to be choosing the things that are good and are better. Okay, and there are a couple of other examples in the book of Proverbs where this exact Hebrew formula doesn't occur. So let's just quickly note them. I didn't put them on your sheet, but in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 12, it says, "Let a bear robbed of her whelps meet a man rather than a fool in his folly." Okay? Now, you could actually put that in English in a better than formula. In other words, it would simply say, it is better to meet a bear robbed of her whelps than to meet a fool in his folly. Now just think of how mad a bear is when the Hebrew seems to imply that you are the one who did something to her cubs and she knows it. So just think of how mad a bear would be at you when you do that. But Solomon says it would be better for you to meet a bear in that situation than to meet a fool who is engaging in his folly. That ought to tell you something about how bad foolishness is. And foolishness, remember, we looked at the 5 kinds of fools who are walking that particular path. Okay, and then there's another one where, even though it doesn't have the formula, it would work. Chapter 21 and verse 3, "To do justice and judgment is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice." So we could say, putting it in a better this than that, we could say it is better to be just and righteous than to offer sacrifices like in a religious context to God. Okay? So again, technically, we don't have the Hebrew formula, but we do have the same general thought. So that's what we're talking about. But the 21 examples that I listed on your sheet on the reverse side of the handout are all examples where we have the formula. This is better than that. Now, a great biblical story to start us off concerns Solomon, setting the stage for us. Maybe you want to turn back to 1 Kings chapter 3. This is right when he is assuming his new position. 1 Kings chapter 3. And in verses 5 to 15, this is when, as you know, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at Gibeon. And the Lord said, "Ask me what I shall give you." And in verse 7, Solomon responded, 1 Kings 3:7, "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in." Okay? Question. How old was Solomon? And this is because today is the first Sunday, so we have refreshments. This is for a sugar-coated chocolate donut, okay, when we go to the gym. So how old was Solomon when he says this? He's taking over as king, and he says, "I am a little child, and I don't know how to run the affairs of the kingdom." This isn't a trick question, but the Bible does not give us his birth date, and we know how long he ruled, but it doesn't give us how old he was when he died, so we can do it. How would you work through this when your 3-year-old comes with one of these questions that mommy or daddy's supposed to know? "Hey, Dad, hey, Mom, how old was Solomon when he became king?" Would you just say, "Shut up, little kid, learn your math table first"? Or 7, 30, 8, 21? Wow, everybody's going the whole gamut here. Okay, we need help, okay? We need help. Okay, well, when you stop and think of it like this. What are the dates of Solomon's reign? This is going to take too long. Let's move on to something else here. What are the dates of Solomon's reign? Whoa, do you have a study Bible, Kathy? Oh, yeah, okay, all right. Good. Okay, Solomon reigned from 970 to 931. And so let's just, for the fun of it, maybe this would be for extra sprinkles on your donuts. What were the dates when David reigned? It ended in 9. Okay, you get one sprinkle on your donut. Wilson, step up to the fore here. I'm not even badgering you today. No, not probably. I'm asking for... Okay, pardon? 10 to... Okay. Almost thought Wilson said that, and it was like, what? 1010 to 970. So this is when David reigned, and this is Solomon's reign. Okay. So how old, or when was Solomon born back here? So we know how old he was in about 970. Because when he took over, he said, "I'm just a little kid. I really don't know how to handle a kingdom." Can you think of another story in the Bible that narrows it a little bit? Why David and Bathsheba, Phil? Solomon's mom. Okay, so remember, when David took over in 1010, Bathsheba was not one of his wives. Now, we're not exactly sure when David's murder of Uriah the man, and then he took Bathsheba. We're not exactly sure when that occurred. Generally, when you start putting chronology together, it seems to have been maybe around 993 when that battle occurred, when Uriah was killed. And so, remember, the child that Bathsheba was pregnant with died, and then she got pregnant again, and Solomon was born. So, we've worked through all that to say roughly, it is thought probably about 991 or 992, somewhere 990, right around. 991 would be probably a pretty good date for the birth of Solomon, which would mean how old would have he been then in 970? Yeah, about 20, 21 years old, okay? So when he uses this expression, he's a little boy, don't think of him as, he still checks into the church nursery when he gets there on Sunday or anything of the sort. But he is fairly young, okay? And by the way, I won't charge you extra for that trivia, but it's important when you're thinking through this stuff to say, well, how old was he? What's going on? Okay, so 1 Kings 3. So what he asked for was wisdom. He was saying, God, I need help to understand how to run the show, if you will. And God said, because you didn't ask for long life, you didn't ask for riches, you didn't ask for the death of your enemies, but you did ask for an understanding heart. You asked for, that's a word that means like a hearing heart or an obeying heart. That Hebrew word can mean to hear, to obey. He said, Lord, I want a heart that hears you. I want to be somebody that obeys you. And he says, now notice in verse 9, he says, give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and bad. And even though you don't see it quite as clearly in English as you would in the original language, he said, Lord, I need a heart so that I will be able to make decisions between the good and the bad. And the word good here is our expression in the book of Proverbs, where it says, this is better than that. It literally says, this is good from that. And so in English, we don't say it's gooder. We say, this is better than that. And that's exactly what Solomon was asking for here. He was saying, God, I'm young. I need your help because I have all these decisions to make as a king, and I can't just say, it doesn't matter what decision I make as a king and rule the kingdom. He says, I need wisdom so I make the better choice. I make the right choice in each situation. And I find it interesting then, as the chapter concludes, verses 16 to 27, we have this really interesting story where we see how God answered prayer in giving him wisdom in order that he might be able to discern or make a judgment call between these two harlots. And there was only one boy that was still alive from them, and they both said, that's my son. The other one said, no, that's my son. And so they came to Solomon and said, Solomon, whose son is this? Wow. He didn't have genetic testing that he could do. Didn't have, grandmas to go to and say, hey, do you remember seeing your grandchild a couple days ago, and what did he? No. Now, this is an interesting thought, and we won't get bogged down here, but if you would have been Solomon, what would have you said to those two women? Did you ever stop and ask yourself how you would have made this decision? Would have you said, I'm not going to give either of you custody. I'm going to put it up for adoption and child welfare agency? Would have you said, well, we'll split custody. You each, for the first year, you get the child on the weekends and the other one on the week. And how would have you handle it? I mean, it's kind of amazing when he says, well, let's just cut the child in half and you can each have half. And of course, you read that and you say, duh, that doesn't solve anything. Now you've got two dead children. But it really is amazing how God gave him wisdom so that he would be able to know, and then he could discern right away who was the real mom and who was not the real mom. Okay. So I say all this because this is our topic for today, and this shows us exactly how down to earth and how real this really is. I mean, hopefully you didn't have to make a decision this week on life or death for somebody, or cutting a child in half. Maybe there were times you wished you could have, or who knows. But I mean, we all have big decisions that we have to make that are going to have profound consequences down the road. And that is exactly what Solomon asked for there, and God gave it to him. And now that's exactly what we find when we come to the book of Proverbs. Okay? So, hopefully, as we grow or as we mature in our walk with the Lord, and those of you who've been around a long time, remember I used to harp on this would be a good word for it. But I used to say, the farther we go down this road of life, the more our struggle ought to be not between what is good and bad. When I get up in the morning and say, okay, Royce, you have this path, which is good stuff here, but you also have this evil. Now, which two are you going to choose? And, I'm pulled both ways. No. Hopefully, the older I grow in the Lord, that's not my daily struggle. My daily struggle ought to be what is good and what is better and what is best. Because you can spend your whole day doing things that are good, and still you come to the end of the day and you say, wow, was life really worth it today? Or you can even sometimes do better things and say, you know what, but it could have been at a whole nother level where I would have chosen the best things. And that's what I think we're being challenged with right here. It's a matter of constantly looking at our lives and saying, okay, how can I, as I'm walking this path, my struggle is less and less with the ungodly character traits of people here. My struggle over here is more and more, I just want to be more like Jesus. I want to be more sanctified. And when we come to the end of the class, we're going to really emphasize that, because that's what this is really talking about. It's talking about sanctification. It is being more like Christ. And hopefully that's what our daily desires really are. So at the top of your handout on page 2, if you flip it over there, notice the quote, "Godly people seek to base decisions on what God, rather than society, deems acceptable. Rather than attempting to be politically or socially correct, they study the Scriptures in order to make biblically correct decisions. Our personal lives can become much more in keeping with the plan and purpose of God if and when we begin to make our decisions and order our personal lives according to the pure and simple wisdom of God." So, hopefully that can get us off and running. Now, if you look at both sides of your handout, perhaps you say, wait a minute, the script is so different, the type is so different, etc. What is going on here? Okay? Well, I have to make a true confession here. The side that I just read from, with the one that has the biblical and the little guy there with his dunce or with his graduation hat and so on, that particular side of your handout I actually used over 25 years ago when I would go a couple times a month to the Ogden Rescue Mission for a morning Bible study at 7:30 in the morning, when the guys had committed themselves to the mission, because they knew if they get back on the street they're going to falter. So they committed themselves there to be there, and so the mission had a 7:30 morning Bible study for them, and I volunteered to go several times, and so I actually used this for them. And I was going to redo it, and I thought, number one, why reinvent the wheel? And number two, this is a really good sheet. It's all right there, what I would have put on the sheet anyhow, so I would just reprint that and then add to it. So I've added a lot and studied a lot more, but that's why it seems to be such a difference, okay? And if you were at the Ogden Rescue Mission 25 years ago for that 7:30 Bible study, you can leave right now and go to the gym and start having coffee and donuts if you want to. But okay, nobody's leaving, so nobody was there. Okay, so there are 21 examples of our formula in Proverbs. This is better than that. And when you study these Proverbs, again, it can be a little difficult to say, well, do we just want to go one by one the way we have with our other subject studies? Or is there a way we could kind of bring them together a little bit more? And so as you see on your sheet there, side 2, it seems to me they fall into basically 3 broad categories. So note the categories. We have the category of wisdom versus materialism, or wisdom is better than wealth or material things, or as we might say today, just stuff. Second category, wisdom it's a little bit with peace is better than a lot with strife. In other words, it's better to maybe be lacking in some things, but it's just a great atmosphere. The people are great, life is great, etc., than to say, look how wealthy I am, but I can't get along with anybody. My life is the shambles. My children won't even talk to me. He's saying, no, it's far, far better to have less and be living a life under, shall we say, shalom, the peace of God, where everything comes together as it should, than to be bragging about all the material stuff you have, but life is the pits. And then the third category, miscellaneous contrasts, and this is what all good Bible teachers do, and you can't think of a better way to do it, is simply call it miscellaneous. But actually, that column, as we'll see when we get there, seems to really emphasize character traits per se. And we're going to really play on that as we walk through and then as we come to our application. And the reason I use the balance here for each of these is I'm trying to make the point that when these options are presented to us, we want to choose, if you will, the heaviest item. So in other words, if, let's just pretend this is our balance beam and we have something on each end, hopefully when there's, we look at this and like wisdom or the godly things really tip it in one direction. They're the heaviest things. And we say, well, yeah, that's the weightier matter here. Of course, that's what I would want to choose. And so maybe we can kind of keep that thought in our mind as we go through here. So At the very top, I did list just a couple of characteristics of Proverbs to remind us again of how terse they are and yet how significant. So first of all, a proverb is brief, that is, it's few words. It is very concrete, that is, it is not abstract. It comes from a definite aspect of human living, and then a proverb is a general truth. In other words, it is very timeless in that it doesn't matter where you live, when you live, etc., it's going to apply to you, but it uses the very concrete things to give us a universal appeal. However, sometimes the illustration might not work in a different culture. And that's why sometimes we really struggle with Proverbs that we find in the Bible, because it's like, well, we're not in a Near Eastern or a Middle Eastern culture, 3,000 years ago. We're in a 21st century America, and some of the things are different. And that's where we say, well, what was the punchline God was trying to make to those people, and how would we better state it today? And for example, just think of some phrases that are little proverbs we use. We've mentioned before, like a stitch in time saves 9. Now, for most people, that would probably, they'd understand what we mean by stitching cloth. But there are some civilizations, there are some people in the world that they don't have cloth. So if you told them that, they would say, duh, why is that so profound? What does that mean? Or don't we have one that says something like, never look a gift horse in the mouth? And maybe they'd say, horse? What is a horse? We don't even have horses around here, okay? So you'd have to say, well, this is what it means. And if you want to know what it means, ask Phil Bach here. He's shaking his head. He's shaking his head like he doesn't know. Okay, so don't ask him. Or we say, the early bird gets the worm. And maybe you're in a culture where there are very few birds. Now, that's kind of hard for me to believe that there'd be some place in the world where there really aren't all that many, but there easily could be. So you say, well, what is the point of that? And then you put it in an equally significant proverb in the culture of those people to drive home the timeless truth. Okay? So that's what we're talking about, and that's why with some of these proverbs we do at times struggle a little bit. So let's begin on the left-hand column here, and we're going to need to be fairly hasty again. And on the second page of your handout there, you do have all 21 references. On the other side, on page 1 of your handout, as we go down there, I have not reprinted every one of those verses. I knew I was going to run out of space, so I basically just tried to give you a verse if I had a quote that I wanted to include there. So don't get frustrated. Today I'm going to be saying a fair number of things that aren't actually written right there on your sheet per se, but you can see how the two will work together. Okay, so we start off with wisdom or materialism. Okay, so the first category really is reminding us that the choice we need to make between wisdom and material things, wealth, riches, accumulating stuff, etc., and so forth. Now remember, in the book of Proverbs, as well as through the entirety of the Bible, there is no place where we read that wealth or riches are wrong. Okay? So when some of these verses start talking about poverty, don't say, well, I don't know how I could ever become godly because I just don't want to be poor, and I'm not going to give away everything I have so I can be somebody who just kind of lives in the gutter and sits at intersections and says, we'll do something for food. That's not what God is saying. The Bible never puts a premium on poverty for the sake of poverty. But in many of these choices, as we will see, the wealth is something that somebody got illicitly, or the Bible definitely condemns it when somebody says that my goal in life is to be wealthy and make money. And you can maybe in this margin, if you want to, see 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 9 and 10 and 17 to 19, where it contrasts two very different mindsets. One of them is a person who, it says, if you are wishing to be wealthy, and then the next verse shows you all the bad things that are going to happen to you in life. But you drop down later in that chapter and it says, but if you are wealthy, you didn't say, that's my goal in life. You're just kind of doing along in life, and all of a sudden you say, wow, it's incredible how much I've saved. It's incredible the way my IRA is building up. And God doesn't say, well, you ought to be ashamed of yourself and give it away so you can be godly. He simply says, if you do have money, then here are some precautions, because it's real easy when you get money to start doing these things. And that's a whole other sermon in itself on a rainy, well, we need a lot of rainy days around here, don't we? But just remember to keep that contrast in mind. There's nothing wrong with wealth per se, but it's how you got wealth. It's if you set your goal toward that, it's guaranteed you're going to be making wrong decisions in life. So, the first four references that we have here all refer to the value of wisdom. They all refer to the value of wisdom. So, for example, chapter 3 and verse 14, the merchandise, well, verse 13 has just told us, oh, the blessednesses of the man who finds wisdom and the man who gets understanding. So then in verse 14, the profit or the merchandise of it, that is wisdom, is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof is better than fine gold. Okay? So it is simply reminding us here that it is so much more blessed to have wisdom than it is to have material gain, because wisdom will do so much more for us than a big bank account. And so I did put a quote on your sheet there. The best long-term investment one can make is the pursuit of God's wisdom and understanding. The dividends it yields far outweigh any gains made by the pursuit of gains in capital. Or a quote I didn't put on your sheet, but this is a good way of looking at it. Money can put food on the table, but not the fellowship around it. And we're going to see that kind of played on later in the book. Money can buy you a house, but not a home. How many houses are there in America compared to how many homes there are in America? Money can give a woman jewelry, but not the love she really wants. Why aren't some of these wealthy women who have $50,000 rings they wear around and about $1 million of bling around their neck, why are they so dissatisfied and so ungodly? Wisdom bestows both material and spiritual benefits, and therefore wisdom has far greater value than any material things you can have. Okay? There's a Talmudic proverb, and I listed this on your sheet. Lackest thou wisdom? What hast thou acquired? In other words, if you've acquired a lot but you don't have wisdom, what do you really have? What's the bottom line? Hast thou acquired wisdom? What lackest thou? You say, oh, all I have is wisdom. Good. What are you lacking? You've got the most important thing, so all those other things will fall into place then. It's not a big deal. Okay? And due to limited time here, I'll let you look through 8:11, 8:19, and 16:16, because they all basically are saying the same thing. It's interesting, in 16:16, however, the comparative changes to a superlative, where it says, how much better it is to get wisdom than gold, and to get understanding rather to be chosen than silver. Okay? Now, when we say this is better than that, that's comparative. But when the Hebrew adds the word how much, we've now moved it to the realm of the superlative. It's saying it's not just a matter of, well, this is better than that. It's saying this is the greatest thing that you could have, far greater than anything else. And that's the point that all these references here in column 1 are making. And then in 22:1, where it says, a good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. A good name is a good reputation, or to be esteemed, and loving favor refers to like social favor with people or public approval. So it is simply telling us that it is so much more important, so much more valuable to guard your character and to be sure that your name is held in esteem. Again, not in a self-centered way, but it's just like, well, yeah, Roy Short is a nice guy. He really is fun to be around. He's honest, blah, blah, blah. Then that is so much better than to have all these great riches. And you've heard me refer before, like growing up in a small town in northwestern Ohio, where everybody knew everybody else. My dad being a businessman owning 2 businesses, so everybody knew him. The worst thing that could have ever happened to me was for those businessmen to be sitting around the local Greasy Spoon drinking their coffee and eating cookies, and for one of them to say, "Hey, Bob, I heard your son did thus and so last night. I heard the police caught him on thus and so." Man, that would have killed me to think what I did to the Short family name, what I did to my parents. And there was an incident when I was about a junior in high school where we showed up one day, and the high school had been vandalized, spray painted, desks overthrown, all kinds of stuff. And everybody knew who did it. It was a couple of brothers from the other side of the track, what people would probably normally call riffraff. So, of course, the principal got on the mic and said, "When we find who did this, boy, we're going to give them the full 9 yards." Very interesting. They found out it wasn't riffraff who did it. One of the key executives of a big company in town, it was his son. Another guy who was in cahoots with him was his friend who was a pastor's kid, a PK. Guess what happened? Did they give him the full 9 yards? Are you kidding? But see, that's what it's saying here. You can ruin your reputation. Doesn't matter how much wealth you have or how whatever. What really matters is keep your reputation. Be somebody who has a good name. Okay, let's hasten on to the second column then. A little with peace is better than a lot with strife. The Proverbs in this column all seem to put the wife in a bad light. Okay, so ladies, don't run out of here and say, "Yeah, I knew that's what Royce was like." No. Actually, these things are just as applicable if you turn it around and if you have a quarreling husband or a husband who produces strife, okay? So the point that it's making here is not necessarily just the man is in the right and the woman's in the wrong. The point is, if you are in a setting like this where one of them is just constantly producing strife and chaos, etc., it just makes it for a very, very difficult situation. So 15:17 says, "Better is a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled ox or a fattened ox, and hatred therewith." Okay? And some translations, instead of herbs, would say a dish of vegetables. But beware of this, okay? This is not a verse you use if you want to be a vegetarian. That's not what the thought is. Actually, the verse basically says the opposite. It's saying eat meat, okay? But if you don't have meat, well then, okay, eat vegetables. But so don't pull this out of context and say right here is the verse for all who want to be vegetarians, okay? But the point is, herbs or vegetables were the usual meal for an average person, okay? They didn't eat meat generally as much as we did, or at least probably not. And the fattened ox could be, a synecdoche just for fine food. So it's contrasting the ordinary plain meal that generally you would eat with what we would call a real celebration, where, a couple times a year you just really put on the dog and really, really get stuff out for the table. So the contrast is really between comparative wealth and poverty, and between the contrast in the atmosphere, love or hatred. So what it's saying is, in effect, it is better, whether you're in the home or dining out in a restaurant with somebody, to be eating a meager fare, but it's a good spirit, a good atmosphere, it's a lot of good company. That is far better than to be eating high on the hog in a tenseful, full of strife banquet. And again, just think of how true that really is. I mean, if you ever sat down, and you don't need to publicly acknowledge it, but did you ever have a meal? And I mean, it was like, wow, these people that I'm eating with, they're against each other. They're making snarkily comments about each other, all kinds of stuff. And so what if this is a 16-ounce tenderloin I'm eating with a 1.5 pound Idaho potato? And so what? You get indigestion from it if the atmosphere is bad. I wish we'd have just gone to a burger joint and had, nuggets and fries and a senior coffee or something where it was great company and it was a lot of fun to be talking to the people. And that's the point that is being made here. It is that a little bit with peace, with a good atmosphere, far surpasses all this other kind of high on the hog living. Chapter 17 and verse 1, "Better is a dry morsel and quietness than a house full of sacrifices with strife. Now, a dry morsel, as we would say today, is basically a leftover, and maybe somebody didn't even put the tie on the bread, so the bread that's left over is actually a little bit stale, and you don't even have anything to dip it in. But he's saying it is far better to have a stale piece of bread than to be eating, as we would say, eating so well. And the word sacrifices here could actually be a reference to the sacrifices on the peace offering. Because you remember, of the 5 major offerings that God gave to the Israelites, one of them was the peace offering, and that was the offering where you really didn't give all that much to God. You got the best slices of meat for yourself so you could throw a party for family and friends. And if that's the case here, this is quite a contrast, because it's saying it is far better to be eating stale bread in a good atmosphere than to be eating such good meat, but yet it is a time of strife. Or, as one writer said, a good quote, it is better the peaceful and honest integrity of a meager meal than the clamorous hypocrisy of religious sham. Because what you could have is you could have this person who says, "Oh yes, Royce, I'm offering a peace offering to God. God is so excited with it, and so I want you to be one who comes and shares it with me." But in reality, when you go, there's no peace. All it is strife. There is no goodwill. There is no fellowship. And it's like the person is saying, "Look how goody-goody I am before God. I offered this peace offering." And in reality, it's like, "Buddy, it would have been better if you wouldn't have had such a big festival today, because you're a hypocrite. You're not at peace with God. You're not at peace with anybody on this level either." So again, this is a pretty strong contrast, but it is reminding us of the importance of making right choices. 21:9 and 25:4 are the same, and they're referring to, again, just dwelling in a small space is far better than being in this huge house with somebody who's constantly bringing up strife and problems. And of course, when it says better to dwell in the corner of a housetop, remember, in the ancient Near East, their houses actually were flat roofed. And so it wasn't a big deal to be up there. In fact, there were times when maybe you would even build a small guest room on the roof of your house. Like you can go back to Deuteronomy 22:8. That could be the first OSHA rule that we have in the Old Testament, okay? Where it says when you build your house and you have a flat roof, you are responsible if somebody falls off of it. And so therefore it's best to build, as we would say, build a fence around it. Where here the point is simply, it would be far better to be living on the roof of your house in cramped quarters where you can basically turn around in the room than to be down in the house with, and the King James Version uses the word a brawling woman. The word is actually dealing with like quarreling or contention. Than to be in a huge place and you say, "Look at this 8,000-foot mansion I'm living in. But I sure am glad she stays over in that corner and I can stay over in this corner because, wow, just constant strife and upheaval and chaos and you name it." No, it's saying it would be far better to just enjoy life and have very little than to be bragging on how much you have, but your life is the pits. Everything falls apart because of this chaos. And then 16, and then 21:19, basically the same. It is better to dwell in the wilderness. Now remember, the wilderness, if you lived in Israel, the wilderness is not where you wanted to live. Okay, that was a God-forsaken place, basically uninhabitable. You had a hard time finding water, food, etc. But again, he's just drawing a very strong contrast to say it's far better to be in what would seem to be a desolate place than to be in a huge area and have a woman who is contentious. This is our word for quarreling again. And a woman who is constantly vexatious or causing vexation. Finally, we come to the last column, and this is where we want to really buckle down in 16 minutes if that's possible. But these are miscellaneous contrasts, and as I said, this third category basically seems to stress the importance or value of character traits. And so as we're walking down here, you can kind of be thinking of the character trait in your mind. And then in our application section, we'll specifically look at that. Now, 1922 is difficult, as I put on your sheet. King James, the desire of a man is his kindness, and a poor man is better than a liar. Well, what is going on here? Well, the NASB, New American Standard, says, what is desirable in a man? In other words, they are interpreting this to mean that this is the quality that other people desire to see in people. They desire to see they desire to see kindness. And this is that great Old Testament word, covenant loyalty, which means that when you vow to something, you keep your promise, even if it costs you more than you thought, even if whatever, you are always loyal to your word. This is one of the great words of the Old Testament, giving us God's attributes. Okay? Now, the NIV takes it basically like the King James does. It's what a man desires for himself. In other words, a man desires that he really have this character trait. And really, whichever interpretation you're going to take, you come out at the same place when it's all over with, so it's not a big deal. But the point here is, it is far better to be someone with covenant loyalty and to maybe be so-called poor in the eyes of the world than to be a person who is a liar. So it's reminding us of your character is far better than being wealthy and being a liar. And I think on your sheet I put a quote, it is better to be poverty-stricken than to be disloyal and untrustworthy, a man of lies. So what if somebody says, well, look at my wealth? Yeah, but you're a liar. So what if you're wealthy? You don't have what really matters. And here's another person who might seem poor, doesn't have all the stuff that you're supposed to be if you're red, white, and blue American, but the person can be trusted. You make a deal and you don't even need to shake hands on it. You just know, take it to the bank. He said that's what he was going to do. He will do it for you. Okay, we come to 1632. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that rules his spirit than he that takes a city. Or better is a patient man than a mighty hero or a warrior, a recognized army champion, than the person who would take a city. And this seems kind of weird, like, really? You think of a mighty warrior, somebody who goes and does a great feat of excellence and conquers something in a battle, and you're saying, but the man back home who is a very patient individual is actually be better to have that attribute than to be known as a mighty warrior who went out and happened to do an important thing in one battle. Well, on your sheet I put a quote, the society at large is better served by one patient man who consistently is slow to provocation than it is by a great military hero who in the flash of a moment achieves some great victory. It's kind of interesting to think of that, but again, it reminds us of what God considers important and how important it is not just to have one flash of brilliance, if you will, and say, but look at my macho this one time when I served in the military. But what is your daily life like? Are you a person who is known for your long, because this is what the word really means, your long suffering. Takes you a long time to get angry. You're not wearing your feelings on your sleeve. You don't just blow up because it happens to be August 7, or because we did get rain yesterday, so I can't say because we haven't had rain in 2 weeks, but you get the point. It's just an internal quality that you have. 25:7, better it be said, come up here, than that you should be put lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen. Now the motivation for this was in 25 and verse 6, the previous verse, where we read, put not forth thyself in the presence of the king, and stand not in the place of great men. Then verse 7, for it is better that it be said unto you, come up here, than that you be put lower in the presence of the prince whom your eyes have seen. In other words, there is greater glory when somebody recognizes your value and promotes you than there is to be patting yourself on the back and blowing your balloon big, and then somebody comes along and pricks it, and just like that you're deflated and you are demoted. A far better character trait is to be humble and let God be the one who exalts you in his time and way. And I put on your sheet a couple of good contrasting examples. Think of David, 2 Samuel 7. This is the great Davidic covenant chapter when David he said, okay, I'm pretty much settled in Jerusalem and I'm going to build a temple for God. Okay? And God came to him and said, David, that's nice of you to do it, but you're a man of war. But you know what I'm going to do for you instead, David? I'm going to give you a house, an eternal house. I'm going to give you eternal posterity who's going to continually rule, etc., etc. And it's like, wow. David was just trying to do what he thought was right. And God said, because of your attitude, your spirit, I'm going to bless you in ways that I haven't blessed anybody else. Or then think of Nebuchadnezzar in Daniel 4, where it says he walked around in his palace. Do you people know who's ruling you? Do you know how good I am? And as the verse goes on, it says, I, me, my, mine. And then it says the next moment the rug was pulled out from under him. It doesn't say that in English, but it's what it means. And he was out in the pasture, and for 7 years he was eating grass like an ox. His hair was growing, his fingernails were growing, etc. Wow, what a contrast. Here's a man who self-promoted, thought everything in life revolved around him, and God pricked his balloon in a hurry, and boy, was he demoted. We come to 27:5. Open rebuke is better than secret love. Again, this is kind of interesting, but with secret love, you're thinking, well, is the person afraid to correct somebody because they don't want to hurt their feelings, and they say maybe it would ruin the relationship? Is it just that they really don't care about that other person anyhow, so they really don't have what the Bible would describe as love? And of course, what this is reminding us of is the fact that honest criticism is not easy to accept. I mean, who walks around and says, hey, buddy, can you criticize me? Can you pull the rug out from under me today? Hey, can you slice and dice me today? No, nobody likes that. But if we really do have a problem and somebody comes to us and tries to help us, we ought to be thankful they cared that much for us to want to correct us and help us so we could have better characteristics. And of course, we find in the Bible over and over that God does this to those whom He loves. In Proverbs 3 and verse 19, we see that. In Revelation 3:19, as God was dealing with one of those churches. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 3 and verse 11 and 12, we saw that last week in our Sunday sermon. God corrects, that's the same word. He chastises, He rebukes those whom He loves. It proves that you are genuinely His child. Or you can think of Hebrews chapter 12, quoting that passage in Proverbs 3, where it says, you know you're not a bastard, you're a real child of God because you are being corrected. And God does that because as your Father, He loves you that much. 27:10, the whole verse deals with friendships, but especially the last part of it, where it says, better is a neighbor that is near than a brother that is far off. And the near and the far off are referring to distance or space. They're not referring to, oh yeah, I have a brother who lives 2 streets over from me, but boy, we don't even talk to each other and we don't drive past each other's house because we hate each other. So no, it's talking about near and far. And it's saying build up friendships. Yeah, have good family friendships, but have people who aren't your family who are good friends, because there are going to be times when you're going to get into deep water and you're not going to have a genuine blood relative near to you to actually help you. So it's good to have a friend who is close by that can help you at a time like that. Chapter 12 and verse 9, I like the way the NIV has put this. Better to be a nobody and yet have a servant than pretend to be a somebody and have no food. And that verse is all about really appearances. Somebody who walks around saying, well, look at me, look at my expensive suit. Oh yeah, a suit like this goes for $850 on sale. Look at those shoes, $712 for those alligator boots. But the guy doesn't pay his bills, his character stinks, blah, blah, blah. Be far better to just be thought a nobody, but yet what you really have is a person who is humble. He knows how to live within his means. Chapter 15 and verse 16, better is little with the fear of the Lord than great treasure and trouble therewith. Let you dig that out in your own. Chapter 16 and verse 8, as we need to move quickly here. Better is a little with righteousness than great revenue or profits without justice. The emphasis is, again, not poverty and wealth. It is better to be a poor person than have money. No, the emphasis is on the importance of righteousness over unrighteousness or injustice. It is better to be somebody who is righteous, even if you are poor and kind of looked down on in the world, than to be somebody who is wealthy, but you are as crooked as can be. No justice with you, no righteousness with you. Chapter 19 and verse 1, better is the poor that walks in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. This seems to be assuming that there is a point in your life where you came to and you had to make a choice to, shall we say, make it big or to choose integrity. In other words, you said, do I want this promotion, or do I want to speak the truth? And if I don't get the promotion, I'm willing to speak the truth because I'm a person of integrity. And this is a word for like wholeness, where it doesn't mean you're perfect, but it means that basically you do have moral character. You try and do what is right. This is the word that is used of Job in chapters 1 and 2, where 3 times it says he was a perfect man. Now we know Job wasn't sinlessly perfect, but he was somebody who basically, when you looked at him outwardly, you would say he was a very godly person. This is the word that was used for a sacrificial animal. When God said, you bring a perfect specimen, he didn't mean, what he meant was on the outside it looks like it is a healthy animal. You couldn't bring an animal to God and say, I know it has a broken leg, but I wouldn't get anything on the open market, so I'll give it to you. Or I know this sheep is sick because look at this pus running out of its eye, but I'm going to give it to you before it dies on me. No. You looked at the sheep and you said, it's healthy. From all indications, it is whole. And that's what it says right here. It is far better to be somebody with this kind of integrity, even if it costs you, than to be an ungodly individual or have bad character traits and get wealthy. And chapter 28 and verse 6 basically says the same thing. It seems to be implied that you had to make that choice. Will I go for the profit no matter what I need to do or say or be? Am I willing to tweak the truth to get it? Or do I say integrity? And even though King James Version uses a different word, it's the same word, integrity here. My integrity means too much. I am going to be a person true to God. And if it means I don't get the promotion, if it means I don't get whatever, that's fine with me. I need to be true to God. And so it's reminding us when we come to the fork in the road, there will be consequences. But we need to choose that which is godly. Well, that's going really quickly there, so you can go back and look at all the examples there in that right-hand column. But by way of application, as we bring this to a conclusion, remember, as I've said multiple times, the book of Proverbs, even though we generally don't think of it as such, is really a sanctification manual. In other words, it is telling us, okay, you need to be saved. You need to come to that point in life where you fear God, because remember in chapter 1, verse 7, that's really a salvation expression. You need to get to that point, and then from there until the end, you simply walk with God. You're sanctified. And so, as I put on your sheet there, sanctification is simply the process whereby the Holy Spirit is at work in the life of a believer on a daily basis to make us more like Jesus Christ. And so, in other words, if we have, a timeline of our life, and you think of back here when you met the Lord and were saved, and here is either death or the return of the Lord, from this point to that point, God is at work to sanctify me. It's not an instant thing like I say, well, yesterday I was on a spiritually high cloud, so wow, God is pleased with me, I'm just floating home. No. It's almost as if every morning God says, Royce, what are you doing for me today? Because it's not a matter of yesterday I was godly. Am I more godly today? Do I try and take it up a notch today? And so that's what we're talking about with all these character traits. We're asking God to work in our lives on a daily basis so we will show them forth more and more. So some of the quotes I put at the bottom of page 2. Let's go especially to the ones at the very bottom. These are all quotes from Bob Jones Sr., the founder of Bob Jones University, who really, of course, stressed character, even as the entirety of the education at Bob Jones sought to do. But these are some just really good one-liners that drive home important things. You can borrow brain, but you cannot borrow character. In other words, There's an awful lot of stuff I don't know how to do, and I've got a lot of friends or enemies I can ask if they would help me with them. But I can't say, you know what, I've got an important meeting with the top dog in the state, so I want to borrow character for the night. I'll hire good character for 2.5 hours. Character is the stuffing out of which I'm made. It is who I am. I can borrow a lot of wisdom or a lot of knowledge from other people to fix things in my house, but I can't borrow their character. That's part of me. Back of every tragedy in human character, there is a process of wicked thinking. As I used to, especially specific application to young men going in the ministry, I would remind them how important it is to watch their lives, because as I would describe it, just pretend this is kind of like a table. There are no pastors who are just walking along like this and all of a sudden drop off the edge of the table. When they hear about ministerial failures, ethical failures in the ministry, don't say, oh, he was so godly and he just took one wrong step and there he fell to the bottom of Grand Canyon. Baloney. Slice it thin and it's still baloney. Behind all this was a process. And the really sad thing is usually there were people in his church who knew what he was doing, but, well, he's a big-name pastor. What would we do if he left? We wouldn't be getting these offerings. And so we'll put up with some picadillos. We'll put up with some little sins of his. And then all of a sudden when he comes, he seems to fall off a table. No, he didn't. He had a whole process of wicked thinking. He wasn't growing in Christ-likeness. And this is simply a good reminder to us of how important it is to watch those little things in life, because those little things make a whale of a difference. And then there is no tragedy as tragic as combining high mentality with low morality. A man may be saved in a second, but it takes time to build a Christian character that will stand the test of years and the storms of life, such as our thing right here. You don't become a godly individual overnight because you say, I want to be godly. You become a godly individual over the course of a lifetime because you set your face to be wanting to be more like Christ. And finally, your character is what God knows you to be. Your reputation is what men think you are. All the difference in the world between appearance and what is really on the inside. Well, this is an incredible study, these 21 things. This is better than that. But boy, does it remind us of the importance of the choices we have to make, because choices are going to make all the difference. Okay, go to the gym and enjoy the refreshments. And if you think you deserve those extra sprinkles or extra frosting because you answered something, we'll trust you to have good character and enjoy it.